1972, America launched 9 human missions to the moon, 6 of which successfully touched down, allowing 12 men to walk on the lunar surface. NASA's next chapter of lunar exploration, called Artemis, has the task of not just going to the moon to create a long-term human presence on and around it, but also to prepare for ever more complex human missions to Mars. In short, everything we must be able to do here, we must first do here. So, what will an Artemis mission look like? Everything is designed and tested with our most important element in mind, the astronauts. This is their deep space, human-rated spacecraft called Orion, built in 3 parts. The crew module, where up to 4 astronauts will live and work throughout the flight. The service module, with life support systems for the crew and its own engine and fuel reserves. And a launch abort system, with engines capable of pulling the crew module to safety during launch should anything go wrong. To accomplish the task of launching our crew and heavy payloads, NASA is building the Space Launch System, comprising of a cargo hold, an exploration upper stage, a massive core stage, and 2 extended solid rocket boosters. Altogether, this is the world's most powerful rocket, and it exceeds the legendary Saturn V of the Apollo era in numerous ways. Sitting on the launch pad, the entire rocket, fully fueled, weighs just over 6 million pounds, 5.2 million of which is just the fuel. Once ignited, there is no stopping what comes next. All 4 RS-25 engines and the 2 solid rocket boosters come to life, thundering our crew upwards. 2 minutes after ignition, the solid rocket boosters are spent and released. 8 minutes after launch, the core stage is depleted and separated. The upper stage fires briefly, placing Orion into a parking orbit around the Earth. Here, the crew reconfigure the spacecraft and check systems to confirm everything is ready for deep space travel. With a go from mission control, the crew reignite the exploration upper stage engines to leave Earth entirely. The exact timing of this maneuver is critical to reach a speed that can escape Earth's gravitational pull, but also put Orion on a course that will intersect the moon days later. Once this burn is complete, the upper stage of the SLS is jettisoned and the crew aboard Orion coast for several days toward all that awaits them at the moon. Approaching the moon, we see the fundamental differences between Artemis and Apollo. Instead of requiring Orion to serve as an expendable lunar command module or to carry a constrained lunar lander, the Artemis missions will take advantage of a different approach. But it also includes a dedicated lunar station in orbit around the moon called Gateway. Here at this station, we can pre-stage a robust lunar lander and establish a strong communications relay. Designed with open standards, the Gateway can be expanded as new missions and partnerships develop, allowing multiple human missions on the moon at the same time and enabling ongoing science to be conducted even between human missions. The Gateway is also capable of adjusting its orbit to allow access to every part of the moon, something the Apollo missions could not do. But the real key in this approach is placing Gateway in a unique halo orbit to perfect the maneuvers needed for Mars missions. And with the growing list of commercial and international opportunities, Gateway is the ideal hub between Earth and all that lies beyond. Pre-staging. Everything needed for lunar missions will be positioned in advance by commercial and international partners. This includes rovers, science experiments, and human-rated systems on the surface.
Zooming out as far as we can go, on the far side of the moon we can find one of the biggest impact craters in the solar system, the Aitken Basin at 2,500 kilometers across. There really were so many more images I could have shown you today, but I'll have to save them for next time. I just wanted to leave you with one final image that I found breathtaking. This crater, found near the south pole of the moon, is almost always in shadow. The sun never rises high above the horizon here, meaning only the peaks of the crater stick out enough to be enveloped in light. What you are left with is a stunning contrast, almost like the yin and yang symbol. This is certainly my new desktop background image. But this region isn't just an eerily beautiful place, but it is actually one of the candidates for the future Artemis mission to the moon. The lunar South Pole is of particular importance to future human missions, as there is thought to be millions of tons of water ice to be found in this region, at the bottom of craters like this, forever protected from the sun's rays. If there is to be a future colony on the moon, this is roughly where it would be located. So, there you have it, a sample of some of the most interesting craters on the moon.
So, how does NASA plan to use the Lunar Starship right now? Some parts of this plan are still a bit unclear, but here goes. The Lunar Starship is launched into Earth orbit with its payload for the moon. Next, it is refueled, however much it is needed for the mission. This largely depends on where you want your empty Starship to end up and how much payload you want to take. Starship then flies out to the moon and enters lunar orbit. Once the Starship is in position, NASA will launch the 4 astronauts from Earth out to lunar orbit using the SLS rocket and Orion capsule. Starship then takes its payload down to the surface of the moon, where the payload is unloaded and the crew completes their mission on the moon. We have the one-way cargo method. With just 12 refuelings, this method can take up to 210 tons to the surface of the moon. The launch cost of this mission would be $234 million. This doesn't include the cost of the HLS Starship itself for a few reasons. For one, we don't know what that unit cost will be, but mainly it's because the HLS is going to stay behind as a gigantic lunar base. So in my mind, it is a payload in and of itself, and it wouldn't really make sense to include it in the launch cost. So this $216 million mission gives us a cost per kilogram of $1,100. The positives to this are you get a gigantic base on the surface of the moon, and you never have to transfer tons of cargoes in space. It's all loaded right here on Earth. However, the HLS cannot be reused over and over as a cargo lander, but could be used as a base on the surface. What we need on the surface of the moon for a lunar base. After a lot of thinking, it finally hit me that everything falls into just one of 2 categories. Things we want to come back to Earth, and things we want to leave on the moon. So what do we want to stay on the moon? Well, the structures that make up the base obviously have to stay. Everything we would call cargo also needs to stay. That's all the supplies that would maintain the base and its occupants. That's lunar terrain vehicles. That's science experiments and equipment, power generation units, and stuff of that nature. Truthfully, the only thing that needs to come back to Earth is the people. Of course, they may want to take some rocks or small pieces of science experiments back, but not much else. The whole point of setting up a base on the moon is to bring stuff to the moon after all. So it's not surprising that the majority of stuff falls in the one-way category. So now that we have everything organized into round trip and one way, an important difference becomes apparent. The things that need to stay at the moon are all large, heavy, or in very high quantities. But the stuff that needs to make the longer round trip is very lightweight in comparison. And whenever NASA is asked, hey, what is Artemis? Why is it different than Apollo? They say 2 things. We're going sustainably, and we're going to stay.
Returning to our crew as they approach Gateway, the Orion must match the elliptical orbit of the station in order to successfully dock. Once on board, pre-selected crew members transfer to the Lunar Lander, while those assigned to Gateway remain on station. The Lunar Lander system itself is built for 3 unique steps. Descending from the halo orbit of Gateway down to a low lunar orbit, descending from low lunar orbit to the surface,
The Apollo 11 lunar module Eagle, flown by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, took about 12.5 minutes to go from its orbital speed of nearly 6,000 kilometers an hour to a soft touchdown on Mare Tranquillitatis. This was the first Apollo landing, and it would prove to be the most arduous. Prior to its descent, Eagle was orbiting the Moon around the lunar equator in an east to west direction. This orbit's low point was only about 16 kilometers in altitude, a little over 50,000 feet, and would occur about 500 kilometers east of the landing site. Here, Eagle's main engine would be ignited to begin the descent to the surface, an event called Powered Descent Initiation, or PDI. Eagle's problems began even as the spacecraft appeared from around the moon's limb. It had been fitted with metal sheets below its manoeuvring thrusters to protect its lower section from their hot exhaust, but these were interfering with the reception pattern of its dish antenna. Also, unknown to the astronauts, an error in their trajectory had moved the probable landing point 6 kilometers downrange of its intended spot and nearly into unplanned territory. Once the burn began, further difficulties would mar Eagle's final descent to the surface. The majority of the descent was controlled by the onboard computer, using one of 3 programs stored in its memory. The first, P63, was run 9 minutes before PDI, and it would continue for a further 9 minutes. Its function was to start the engine and control the braking phase. The first 3 minutes after PDI were flown with the windows facing the surface. This allowed Armstrong to time the passing of landmarks and make a crude judgment of their trajectory. Armstrong then turned Eagle around to have the windows face upwards. Now the landing radar could see the surface and feed accurate altitude and velocity data to the computer. With about 3 minutes remaining, control of Eagle switched to P64 and the start of the approach phase of the descent. Eagle pitched forward to a more upright attitude, which gave the crew their first view of the landing site. It also allowed the computer to indicate where on the surface it intended to land, and it gave Armstrong the opportunity to move that point if he thought it unsuitable. About 600 meters out, control was transferred to P66. This put Armstrong into the control loop, letting him adjust Eagle's attitude and rate of descent as he flew helicopter-like to the surface.
And once the lunar mission is complete, launching from the surface of the moon,
the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine. I'm going to step off the laminate. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Oh, that looks beautiful.
all the way back to the orbiting gateway. Once back aboard the Orion spacecraft and undocked from Gateway, the crew fire their engine once to break out of the halo orbit and once again to sling the spacecraft around the moon, placing it on a multi-day trajectory back towards Earth. As they near the end of this journey, the service module is released, and the crew module is oriented heat shield first. Entering Earth's atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour, the friction of air slows Orion considerably, while also subjecting it to temperatures of 5,000 degrees. With the Orion now at just 300 miles per hour, a series of parachutes uniquely tested and produced for this moment deploy, decelerating the craft to just 20 miles per hour for splashdown. With each successful mission, Artemis ushers in the next wave of men and women to explore our moon and prove that together we are ready to go beyond.